Israeli political and economic barriers and food insecurity in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The agenda: research objectives, introduction, current economic challenges, key statistics, Israeli practices and violations, discussion, key findings and recommendations. Presentation objectives will be on three pillars. First, explore war and colonialism context to particularly comprehend the impact of Israeli occupation on food insecurity in hindering economic activities in the West Bank and Gaza. Second, base food security on agricultural infrastructural destruction, structural colonial and state power hierarchy, and absence of freedoms. Third, recognize institutional and individual responsibilities to create a more sustainable, stable future food supply instead of heavy reliance on NGOs, UNRWA, and World Food Programme. The introduction: the West Bank and the Gaza Strip entered an awful, devastating stage of economic recession and instability due to the ongoing Israeli Palestinian conflict, which has undermined any development for the entire community, especially rural farmers and those who live in vulnerability, like refugee camps and suburbs, to secure their food. Palestinians are starving, dying, and losing their lands as the occupation is seizing their farms, demolishing houses, and controlling economic activities. They impose tariffs on imports and exports, ban aid from Gaza, and control borders, water, electricity, air, and massive areas called sea, and a couple of military zones. Still, there is corruption in food distribution that comes from international donors like the Europe, UN agencies, USA, Japan, and Norway, because many poor people and smallholder farmers don't receive aid or get less proportions unfairly. 3. Gaza is being besieged, and it's beyond poverty and hunger red lines. Gaza relies on fishing and water for cultivation, and the Israeli soldiers intensified their attacks to target their lands and sea and block the crossings which supply them with external nutrition aid and medicine. The current economic challenges will range between 4 points. The first one is the restrictions on movements of distribution, trucks, imports, exports, trade, and the blockade on food aid entry in the Gaza Strip through flying checkpoints and closures. The second point is the rapid increase in job unemployment left many workers without jobs in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, leaving some in severe poverty, causing prices to increase due to the weakened food production. Another point is the face of famine in the Gaza Strip and the refugee camps in the occupied Palestinian territories. Finally, the collapse of the agricultural sector is due to the Israeli occupation frequent attacks over the cultivated lands by cutting trees off, imposing pressure to convert arable lands or frontal towns to settlements or creating them as military zones. So they shift the land that's cultivated and arable in any area in the Palestinian localities or the Gaza Strip to become a military zone or just a new established settlement. The key statistics we have that the smallholder farming households constitute the most food insecure population in the world, and the entire population, 2.2 million people of Gaza, experienced high acute food insecurity, with roughly 25% of them in the catastrophic phase until February 2024. 28% of cropland and around 70% of fisheries were destroyed, and by early March 2024 Palestine war, Gazans witnessed severe starvation, especially in northern Gaza, where many people died of hunger, and the prices of basic foods like wheat, flour, and vegetables increased 50 to 85%. 1.6 million people in Palestinian territory are food insecure. Agricultural production dropped by 32%, 17 of the West Bank and 91% of the Gaza, falling to USD 564 million, while services declined to 27%, 17% in the West Bank and 81% in the Gaza Strip, reaching USD dollars of 6.453 million. And as you see the graph here, the unemployment rates actually in different areas in the Palestine, in the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. And by 2024, in the Gaza, it reached 80% of unemployment. This means that the majority of Gazans are unemployed, which affects their poverty, hunger, and starvation, and the economy is slowing down dramatically. It's kind of a frozen, as well as in Palestine and the West Bank, but with much less trends relatively with the Gaza. And we see here another graph that shows the food insecurity, the vulnerable to food insecurity, and the marginally secure people, the food secured people. But that actually differs from one area to another with different levels of food security. But what are the Israeli practices regarding food insecurity? Now we look at the land seizure and settlement expansion, movement and access restrictions, water scarcity, destruction and of agricultural infrastructure, imports, exports, and taxes are Israeli state controlled, and the ascending unemployment rates, which are due to the Israeli labor being closed. Why to study Israeli violations over Palestinian economy? For three reasons. First, the human rights to report the violations of banning food aid, freedom of movement, and inaccessibility to natural resources. And to navigate community awareness, Palestinians must preserve their available lands, human capital, and national economy protected to resist the hunger and poverty that emerge. And also to focus on the alternatives that individuals must figure out small businesses and farming techniques and support the national homemade and local industries instead of unguaranteed imports. Now, let's just switch to the impact of the Israeli conflict on food accessibility, availability, and stability. The availability is about the land seizure, destruction of agricultural infrastructure, import barriers, and water restrictions. These all reduce the domestic food supply, farming ability, and imports. Accessibility checkpoints and roadblocks, blockade on Gaza, control over Palestinian tax revenues, and unemployment and poverty all reduce people's physical and economic access to food. And utilization, damage on water infrastructure, healthcare system, and strain. And electricity cuts. These affects the quality, safety, and nutritional use of food, which is like poor water, disease, no electricity, which means food spoilage. The Palestinian alternatives to halt food insecurity, you have agriculture to implant roof farming, seed saving, rainwater harvesting, and cooperative and kitchen garden farming. Economic labor market by local production, small scale industries instead of imports, tourism and agriculture by promoting the local heritage, holy sites, parks, and natural insights that directly create new jobs. Social resilience, support, volunteer, and educate to protect vulnerable people in remote areas of the West Bank and isolated Gaza, and independent from international aid like food aid and development projects to build schools and refugee camps and rural remote areas, which includes UNRWA, non-governmental organizations, the United Nations, UN, and World Food Program. Now they have the findings, the results with Gaza and the West Bank are in severe stressors of Israeli settler colonial cleansing of the indigenous population by driving them from food aid, controlling natural resources, and hence causing a historical genocidal famine. Destruction of farming, cutting down trees, erecting checkpoints, and flying closures are barriers and faces of imports, exports, and food distribution. Palestinians must exploit their rooftops and public spaces and rely on national food industries to feed their households. The recommendations are to empower smallholder farmers and cooperatives to resist land seizures, share resources, and rebuild distributed agricultural systems, develop local food and water solutions, rooftop gardens, seed saving, rain harvesting to survive hunger, siege, and blockades, create community based economies that reduce dependency, including home industries, women led cooperatives, and local markets, adapt to movement restrictions by building decentralized food networks and preserving local products through traditional techniques, mobilize global solidarity and legal action to expose daily violations, demand justice as well, and protect Palestinian rights to land, water, and dignity.